Here we are, mate. Long time coming. McGee Moody, how you doing, mate?
Good, buddy. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for doing this. This is cool. We were on the deck as coaches for many years in the SEC. You're at South Carolina. I was at Auburn, and we just had an appreciation for each other from the get-go, I think, and a respect. And I like the way that you went about your business. I love the way you handled your team. I had a lot of respect for it. I saw the challenges that you had, both where you were and the things that you had to face. And then just those situations as head coaches where you're competing against each other, and it makes it difficult to really make true connections. And I think you and I have connected even more since I've moved on from college coaching, and now you've moved on from college coach. And I think there's this bond that brings you together and say, hey, we probably should have been a lot closer at the time,
Yeah. And I'd take that back. And I remember when we were, we'd share time on the deck, and we'd be at coaches meetings and SEC coaches meetings and stuff like that. And the one thing I always thought was kind of unique about the SEC is that it's a super competitive conference, but we all got along really well.
Right.
Like the coaches all seemed to be pretty close. We all had each other's back when it came to running our programs and things like that. And I always thought that was pretty unique. But yeah, we had some pretty good times, and there are certain aspects you were talking about, kind of moving away from coaches. There's certain aspects that I miss, but there are certain ones that I don't miss as well. So
yeah, I want to get into that because I think you and I have unique perspectives in the fact that we were in one of the most competitive conferences in the country for many years, running double programs. I call it a double program because you got your men and your women. To me, that's a double program. So, in the SEC, highly competitive, and then we both transitioned out just recently, so it's like, and why, what's the impact of that, and where is it, in the current state, and where, basically for me, it's about educating and mentoring and just giving life stories to other coaches, because look, I had many coaches under me, I'm sure you did too, who it was the ambition of the coach to get to the head coaching position. And they didn't fully understand what that meant and the impact that was going to have on them and their family. And I know you and I have both gone through the good and the bad of that. Right. So that's kind of what I wanted to discuss today. Just give us an update on where you are right now, man.
Well, so after 25 years of coaching back in 2021.
I'm going to get a full screen, by the way, so I can.
Oh, okay. Well, you give everybody that, huh? Back in 2021. Well, I'll take it even farther back than that. I guess leading up to that, go all the way back to 2013. I was on a trip, and it was with Team USA. I was on the World University Games coaching staff. It was incredible staff. It's one of my favorite trips we've ever taken. It was me, Matt Credich, Mike Bottom, Carol Capitani was on that staff, and we were out. Kelly Kramer was on that staff. We were out in Kazan, Russia, at World University Games, and those trips they're 2 and 3 weeks long, pretty normally. And I remember looking at the timing of that meet, and then how it lined up with the timing of when a couple of my current swimmers were going to be competing in another country at nationals. And so I had to talk to USA Swimming, and I got my travel changed from Kazan, Russia. Instead of coming back with Team USA, I was going to be going down to South Africa for another 17 days down in South Africa. And so I'm making this trip, and it was an awesome trip. So many stories, sitting around talking with Matt Credich and Mike Bottom at dinner. And I learned so much during that trip, going down 17 days in South Africa. I fly home, and I remember I'm coming back, and I'm walking in the airport terminal. And I literally I haven't seen my children in a month. And I was walking through the terminal. I had a bag on my shoulders. I'm thinking, I got to go get this. And I'm like, this is time that I'm never going to get back with them. I'm never going to get back. I've missed a month of their lives, and I'm not going to get that back. And
at this stage, how many kids you have? How old were they at this stage?
So at the time, I had all four. I have 4 daughters. So now my oldest daughter is married, lives in Charleston, South Carolina. She's 23. I have a 20-year-old daughter. I have a daughter who's a senior in high school, and then I have a daughter who's in 9th grade. She's 14 now, getting ready to turn 15. And so at the time, and they were much younger. So you think back, rewind 10 years, my 14-year-old was 4. And at the time, I'm walking up the terminal and I'm like, man, I've missed this time. That was the first time. And I remember telling my wife that night, I was like, I don't know how long I can keep this pace up. And that was the first time where I ever was like, this is rough. This is dragging me down a little bit. But, as a coach, we pride ourselves on our work ethic. Like we pride ourselves on working harder than anyone else, which, by the way, is very true. Not being in coaching anymore, the real world doesn't work like coaches work.
I learned that too.
Life is much simpler out here than it is as a coach. But as time went on, that feeling never quite went away. That feeling of, oh, am I losing time with my family? Am I losing time with my family? Yeah. What's this doing to my health? And things start to snowball a little bit. And so I think during the COVID year was one of those times where, and it was never about the athletes on the team. I miss them immensely. I miss being on deck with athletes every day.
Sure.
It was the grind that goes around that. It was, the time away, the travel, the recruiting, the late nights, the writing, the workouts, all these different things that happen around that time period that started to really grind and wear on me. And when I got to 2020, you had COVID year, and that was hard on everybody. Like that beat everybody down. And I know coaches that some men that I thought were and women for that matter, some of the most resilient people I've met just brought to their knees by this. And so coming out of COVID, I think I struggled a little bit as a coach. I thought it affected my coaching. And it came to a point where I sat down in 2021 with my athletic director, my senior associate AD, and he made the statement to me. He said, do you still love it like you used to? And I kind of paused for a second, and I was like, whoa, that's weird. Like I've never paused. And he said, you seem tired. And I said, okay. And my ego kind of got the best of me right there. And I got a little angry when he said that. And, I kind of went to this place where I was like, oh, don't tell me when I'm tired. I'll tell you when I'm tired. And so I started thinking about it. And so I'm talking to my wife about it and things like that. And ultimately we kind of came to the decision where maybe the time was right. Maybe the time was right to step away. I loved my coaching career, but I did see time with my family slipping away, and I did see other things being prioritized over my health, over my time, over all these different things, over my fitness that kind of took me back a little bit. So, long story short, I started looking at this, and I went from thinking about a next contract to maybe what would it look like if I didn't coach? And I think this is kind of interesting because you and I have talked about this before, but my life has transitioned into the financial world. Yeah. Which if you told me 20 years ago, hey, you're going to be watching investments and you're going to be doing financial planning and retirement planning for clients in 20 years, I'd have been like, well, whatever, man. Like, there's no way. But I made that transition. I had a good friend, a close friend of mine who owned a wealth management company. And he kept saying, he was like, you should come work with me. And I'd be like, I don't really know much about that. And he's like, no, you know more than you think you do. And so I was like, okay. How do you mean? What do you mean? And so we kind of go back and forth as a punchline. And finally one day I said, tell me how you see this working. And he said, well, you're a college coach. He goes, what are the 2 things that you do most of? He said, 1, you train athletes, and 2, you recruit. He said, so if an athlete sits down across the table from you and says, I want to become an Olympian, your job as the coach is to, 1, create a plan for them to get there. 2, tell them what changes they'd have to make that a reality. Or 3, say, hey, I don't know if that's in your future. You have to be realistic with them. He said, now take that athlete and replace that with a client who may want to retire at age 55. Your job is to create a plan for them to get there, tell them what changes they'd have to make, or tell them, hey, probably not going to be able to do that given your current situation. And then from a recruiting piece, that speaks for itself. All that to say this, I think a lot of times coaches kind of pin ourselves as I've only ever been a coach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Until you actually look at what that means.
Yeah.
And what I've realized now, looking now from the outside in, is you can do anything you want to do as a coach, anything, because you've done basically everything. So sorry, that was a lot of talking. I took over the whole podcast.
No, it's all good because it creates conversation and it gets people to think. And there's a couple of things I was thinking there as you were talking. One is how awesome and amazing it is that you can just transition your life from having a moment where you say, no, I'm not happy, I'm not satisfied, and I can go and do something completely different, like you said, where you are challenged and excited, and you're basically starting from scratch of like, how do I figure this out? I had a very similar moment when I went into the tech industry a couple of years ago. And tech to me was like, I don't know anything about tech. And all of a sudden I'm in the tech world building an app and working for a tech company and working for a man who basically built Facebook and Uber. And I'm under him and I'm learning from him. And I'm like, this is surreal. This is wild. But he's telling me I'm a unicorn. Like the guy that worked at Facebook, who built Facebook, is telling me, Brett, the swim coach, hey, Brett, you're a unicorn. There's people that they're not out there. They're not like you. You think differently, you act differently, you work differently. You got this. So I had all these skills from being a coach, being a head coach, that transitioned really, really well. Not only did they transition well, but they put me above everybody else who'd been in the industry for many years. So I was like, he was looking at me of like, man, this is wild. And we still have a great relationship to this day. And so I can see that how you could transition into that and be like, no problem at all. The thing that bothers me though is that I regard you as one of the best, right? The elite. And anytime an elite swimmer walks away from the pool before I feel like they've maximized their potential, I'm bothered by it. Anytime an elite coach walks away from swimming and takes his elitism and his knowledge and his and everything that you've learned, when you walk away from that, it bothers me. Like that part of it bothers me. So it's like, man, what are we doing as swim coaches to better put ourselves around each other so that this stuff doesn't happen? We're not isolated. It doesn't take your athletic director, because I had a very similar conversation with my athletic director too. They begged me to stay at Auburn. And I was like, I'm done. Like I'm done. And they're like, well, what if we figure this out? What if we do this? What if we do that? No. You don't listen. I'm done. Like I'm toast. I'm so burnt out. I'm so over it. Give it to someone else and let me try something different in life. Let me have a different challenge in life. I've tried this one. It's burned me out to the point where, look, you had successes at South Carolina and failures. We all have that, but it's like, get to the point where you're like, I've done everything I can do here at this point in this job, and you just give it to someone else at that stage. So, but it shouldn't just be you and I having discussions with athletic director. It should be you and I having discussions as head coaches where we're coming together and saying, hey, yeah, we're recruiting against each other and we're swimming against each other, but like you and I are brothers here. Like let's support each other. Let's work through our challenges together. And I've had more conversations like this, you and I here, with the Matt Krediches of the world, the people that I was competing against, the Greg, Florida.
Greg Troy.
Greg Troy.
Yep.
My brain is not working. Greg Troy, like the Greg Troys of the world, all the people that I'm competing against didn't talk to me. And then all of a sudden we step away and now we're best friends and we're talking, we're discussing the same problems, right? Yeah. So this stuff should happen before we get to the point where we lose great coaches like you, is just my feeling,
Well, I'm kind of blown away just by your comments about that. And I appreciate the kind words, Brett. I really do. That means a ton to me. Here's what, and I kind of would like your feedback on this, because here's what I've come to think over the last few years, kind of sitting back and looking at this. And, the thing that makes, I watch young coaches, and I've heard other coaches sometimes, resist giving advice to new coaches coming in because they're worried about the landscape that they're coming into. And, you've got coaches like a Greg Troy, like Mark Bernardino, who have done such huge things in our sport. And they're looking back on this and you look at the things that they would have done differently. Greg Troy will tell you, he'll tell you if I had anything to do, if I could do something differently, he told me flat out, I would start taking 1 3-day weekend a month off away from swimming completely and not 100%. Thinking anything about it. And here's where I think it's gotten dangerous. And I'm going to speak specifically for college coaches right now. And I would almost say that it might be worse for club coaches than college coaches. But I would love to hear your thoughts on this, Brett. But I believe that college athletics has created such a brainwashing environment that you're kind of brought into this world of, if you're awake, you need to be working, because if you're not working, you're falling behind. And if you're falling behind, you're losing. And if you're losing, you're out. And that doesn't just go for coaching. That goes the same for administrators, fundraisers, compliance officers. Anybody inside this college landscape has been given this mindset of, if your eyes are open, it better be pointed towards making your team better. Your focus better be on winning a championship. And I think that becomes very destructive over time. And I think that takes a huge toll on a lot of the coaches that we see. And so, if I'm talking to younger coaches, I'm talking as much about pace to them as anything. Hey, you got to know when to go all in, and you got to know when to pull back, because you can't go all in all the time. It's going to destroy you from the inside out. And you've got to be able to pull back. I wasn't good at that. I did not. I joke with a lot of people now that my current boss, who is one of my best friends, is a far better boss for me than I was for myself, because he can read me when I'm pushing in too hard, and he'll pull me back. I didn't have anybody to do that before. And so I know I have good friends that are the same way. You went through the same thing. And so I feel like the environment that college athletics has created, maybe of no fault of its own. I think it's only going to get worse now that we're adding NIL into the mix and all these different things. But the landscape that it's created has created such a forward momentum environment that if you pull back at all, you're going to feel guilty. You're going to feel, there's going to be an anxiousness from relaxing. Yeah. And that's a dangerous place to be.
Yeah. No, listen, everything you said is completely accurate. I got to the point where I was so burnt out with college swimming, I didn't care less about the results. Like, people were saying, "Oh, are you watching the swim team? Are you watching this? Did you see this dual meet? Did you see this conference championship?" I got to the point where I wasn't even really interested in the NCAA championship. Not for the fact of the performances that were happening necessarily, right? But for the title fight, for the who's up and who's down, I do not care less. I could care less who's up and who's down and who's winning, who's losing. What I care about is the coaching that's going on. What I care about are the performances that are happening and how they're getting there and what are they doing. Like a Todd DeSorbo, for instance, at Virginia and what he's doing with his women. Obviously, tons of talent, but maximizing the talent. And I'm interested in that, right? I'm not interested in, wow, they haven't won this, right? They haven't won this title in so many years, and then they've gone back to back, and then they've beaten this team by this. I could care less about all that junk, So that stuff didn't interest me. I just pulled back from that completely, and it was more just about going back into the love of swimming and the love of coaching, right? And that's what I kind of put myself into. And I think people got lost in that. They thought that I was still interested. I was not interested in the slightest in the who was winning, who was losing.
It's interesting that you say that, Brett, because I always enjoyed the sport. I always enjoyed, but the older I got into my coaching career, and I guess maybe the older, the wiser, you get to this thought of more process driven. How did we get to that point? But to your point, looking back, like I've probably watched more swimming in the last 6 months, maybe than I watched in the last 6 years of my coaching career. My daughter, my youngest daughter is a swimmer, and she's a little swim nerd. And she'll readily admit that she loves everything statistical about it. And she's all the time, talking about people's splits in their races. And, you were talking about Todd DeSorbo, and I guarantee you my daughter can rattle off UVA women's splits just as well as he can. But the interesting thing is we'll sit down and we watch swimming together. You've got events that are streamed now and you can watch them all over the country. I found myself watching prelims and finals of European juniors with my daughter just because we could. Like there was no reason behind it. I'm not recruiting anybody, but we were talking about the races, and that was really fun to me. Talking to my daughter. Those are things that I had missed. Like that time I had missed, and here I was being able to share that sport that had been a part of my life forever with her in that sort of in-depth way. But I agree with you, man. It's so much more enjoyable when you can step back and you can look at it and you can appreciate the performances and things like that now.
Yeah. Listen, my job got to a point where the only thing that mattered was how many points we won by or lost by, and did you win the championship or not, and where were you positioned from last year to this year. That's all it became about. It wasn't about the development of the athletes. It wasn't about how well they're doing in school. I actually got really upset with my associate AD in one of my final years. She sent me a message around December, just after the first semester, and she's kind of like, congratulations, both your teams are above 3.2 GPA, congratulations, kind of thing. And I was just, at that point, I was just very cynical. I was very, I was
bitter, grumpy old man.
I was bitter. And I was like, don't send me these emails because it means nothing to you. It means nothing. Zero. There's no job security in that. You could care less. None of the alumni could care less. Like, it got to the point where your success overall and the development and your growth and how you're doing in school and it became meaningless. It just became, did you win or lose, right? How much did you win or lose by?
Right.
It became very football minded, right? And it was never at the point where you're only given 1 year like a football coach, but it's certainly getting that way. Like it's getting to the point where you've got, hey, we'll give you 2 years to figure this out. And by the third year, if you haven't, you're out in swimming. That we're definitely there. So we're not that far off it, but it's just all the work that you were doing, all the stuff behind the scenes that your team was doing just became meaningless. And I'm like, what am I doing? Like every day I'm waking up for this shit. This is nonsense,
Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head too, is that a lot of the work that coaches do, a lot of what we have to do in order to see success, especially with today's young people, you've got to connect with them. Like they have to believe in you as a coach, and you have to believe in them as a swimmer. And that doesn't just happen. That doesn't just happen through a time on a race or anything like that. There has to be that connection, and that takes time. You talk about giving a coach a year. Let me tell you something. If you've got a coach that is successful in a singular year, like the way an athletic department wants them to be, I would venture to guess you have a coach who came in and made some top to bottom changes and just basically tore things apart. And I would almost venture to guess that there's been very little done relationally to try to build the relationships with those athletes, because there's no time to do that. And so I think it does go for what you're saying. And you made a great point without even making it, but so many athletic directors, you have very few athletic directors that understand the sport of swimming. Mine didn't. He would openly tell me that. I don't understand you guys. I don't know why you feel you've got to practice every morning. I don't understand why you do this. I don't understand scoring. I don't understand the meets. He would tell me these things. Now, my frustration came from the fact that he never tried to learn them. But they still only know
winning and losing,
a W or an L. That's what they know. And with swimming, as well as I do, with the science behind it and the way it works, you've got very few teams in this country that can be successful in a dual meet season, win a conference championship, and go win a national championship.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You have very few that can do that. Most have to say, okay, we're prepping for the NCAAs. We're gonna hold back our rest for SECs or whatever it may be, or we're gonna go win an SEC title and hopefully hang on for NCAAs and see what can happen. And most administrators don't understand that. They don't understand that well, I don't understand. Well, if you can be fast at SECs, why can't you be fast at NCAAs? It doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah. Which I get that side of it, but that was always difficult too, is working the inner workings of an administration that doesn't understand the sport. And that's on us. That's on us as coaches and as a coaches association to put forward. So these ADs are more familiar with how our sport works, what we do, and how we operate as a program. And I think that
well, listen, I think those things are good. I think it's an uphill battle because most of the administrators don't come from any type of swimming background, and most ADs, it's just never going to be that way, right? What I think is the most important thing that needs to happen is the unification of coaches. That has to happen because, like I said, I was on an island. You were on an island. I think I even mentioned this before I hit record here. I was actually. I'd actually have very vivid memories of looking at you and thinking he looks really unhealthy right now. You did. You just looked unhealthy. Like you were not. To me, your health was number 10 and beyond on the totem pole. You were putting everybody else before yourself. And I was doing the same thing. I'd look in the mirror and I'm like, who is this guy? I didn't recognize. I was an Olympic athlete at one stage. I didn't recognize the man that I was seeing in the mirror. I seriously went through a period of at least 6 years where I didn't do a single day of exercise, not a single day for 6 years. Now, I was in the head coaching position for 10 years. So there was certainly some times in there where I was doing something, but I remember a very long period of time I didn't do anything. So I was not looking after my health. And I remember thinking that about you. And now here you are doing jiu-jitsu. You're climbing the ladder almost at a black belt. You look incredible. You just look like you've taken back control of who you are, your identity, your health. And for me, the impression that I get is that you're a better man, you're a better husband, you're a better father, you're a better person, you're happier in yourself. And that's how I am now. People say to me, why would you walk away from that? There's so many reasons. And one of them specifically was my health. I got to the point where I'm like, I'm going to be dead in 10 years for sure if I keep this up. And now I'm looking at, I'm thinking, well, I could live another 30, 40 years looking like this because I've taken back control of my health. And I felt like you were going down that path, right?
I would agree 100%. And like, I think there's a gift. And I tell people all the time exactly what you just said. Making the move that I made in 2021 probably added 10 years back to my life. Sure. And because I was given the gift of time, and it was time that I could then tell. Before, when I was coaching, time was telling me what I was going to do. And now, since making this change, I get to tell time what it's going to do. I get to choose where my time goes because I have that time available to me. And so I think you're right. I think there's a point where stress and anxiety and just lack of sleep and just constant, it takes a toll and it beats you down. But when you're given that gift of time and you can turn and you can start to focus back in on the things that were being sacrificed, I do believe that it allows me to be a better father. It allows me to be a better husband, which on this planet, on Earth, that's my highest responsibility. My greatest job I've ever been given is that of being a father to my 4 girls. They are my entire life to me. And people that know me best know that that's not just lip service. That is who I am. I wake up every morning with the goal of guiding and protecting and providing for them. That's my job. And being able to do that and having more time to pour into them, having more time, I look back on it now, Brett, and for 25 years, there were times where my wife was a single parent.
Yeah.
You know, and I'll go back and
you're lucky you made it through, actually. Really.
Yeah. And you know, I look back and a lot of people saw Mike Bottom when he decided to step away at Michigan, the video that he released. And, you know, he referenced the world's best dad picture that was on his wall. And he said, I know I haven't been that. And you could hear like the pain and the emotion in his voice. And man, like I almost had to cut that off. I was like, oh, that hit deep. Like, and he said, you know, I'm going to do my best to make up for that now. And I think we have to, as coaches, we have to understand and we have to keep in mind what's important. Like what, you know, we're pouring into kids that their parents have entrusted us to help them grow. I get that, but it's not going to be at the cost of my own children. Yeah.
So, well, listen, we're beating down a little bit college swimming, college coaching, maybe even you know, club coaching. That's not my intent. Look,
no,
everything that you think is good about college coaching is good. Like all the things we say are great, and all the things you think are great, and all the things that you strive to want to be and get to that point. Yeah, I mean, they're great things for a coach to be a head coach of South Carolina, Auburn University. Like, to be a head coach, that's the ultimate. You know, that's amazing. I'm not saying that. Those things are still there. What I'm saying is we talk about those things all the time. You know, the money that you make, the power that you'll have, the decisions you'll be able to do, the things you'll be able to do with your program, the influence you have. Those things are always talked about. What's not talked about is the struggles that you'll have and the pressure that you'll be under, and the times that you'll feel isolated, and the times that you'll be, you know, removed from your family, and the times where you'll just need someone to lean on and talk to and unite with. And I think this is my point here with this conversation is, like, for too long we've held up college coaching as this, you know, this ultimate of like, that's where you want to be, that's where you want to go. But we're not talking about all the stuff that is driving coaches now out of college coaching. You know, like a good man like you, again, it really saddens me to know that you had to walk away in order to save your health and your family, right? When it should be, hey, there should be a support system there for all of us as head coach to say, hey, these are the things we do collectively. You know, like, instead of saying we wake up every day and outwork the other person, we say, you know what, I'm going to work as hard as I can for these 2 weeks. And on the third weekend, I'm taking a weekend off. And the person that I'm competing against is saying the same thing. And we're all saying the same thing. Instead of saying, I'm going to outwork you when you're not working, you should be saying, hey, let's all collectively take some time off here for our family, for our health. Let's encourage head coaches to publicly talk about how they're looking after their health. They're working out, they're doing jiu-jitsu, they're going to the gym, they're running on their time. Like, you know, it's always like this. The head coaches, it's always like your time is always taken. Like you said, it's always given to something else. And as head coaches, we need to say, listen, enough's enough here. This needs to be my time. Like, I need this time, and I need to use it to better look after my health so that I can have longevity and I don't have to walk away from this sport, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, I'm glad you said that, because that's where I was getting ready to turn to. I can honestly say, coaching is the greatest. It's the greatest profession in the world. Like, where else can you go to work every day and influence young people to better themselves and to create just core values like work ethic and you can challenge their passion and get in there and try to make them better. Like, you can't do that in just any industry. You get to help shape people as a coach. And so I absolutely love that. Never once, I'll tell you right now, I will never badmouth coaching. I'll never badmouth the sport of swimming. So much so, actually, you know, when you were texting me a while ago, it took me a while to get back to you. I'm still coaching. I'm coaching my daughter's high school team, and you know, it's much different than coaching in the SEC, but it's awesome. Like it is, and to me, when I kind of made this move, I was contacted by this high school's athletic department here in Columbia, South Carolina, Gray Collegiate Academy, and he asked me, he was like, one of your former swimmers said to give you a call, that they bet you jump back into this. And, it's a really minor, just compared to what you and I have done in the past, but it is so much fun. And I think I've almost fallen back into kind of coaching at its purest form. Like, it's not about a paycheck for me. It's not about going and winning an NCAA title. I get to take these. Now, I will tell you something that's very interesting. I'm taking a lot of the things that we did in college and applying them at the high school level. Pretty interesting, kind of what we're seeing, and that's. I think that's made it kind of fun to me. Is I've always thought, what would it look like if you could run a club or a smaller group in the same way that you run, a college team? If you were to have the same resources and you could have the same amount of time, what would it look like? What would swimming look like 10 years from now in the United States if we were able to do that? And so, but I look and I would never badmouth the sport of, or the industry of coaching, because I think it is, there's so much value in it. But you're right. I think we also have to get a hold of the direction that it's going, and just create kind of this environment, or shift the mindset a little bit to make it more sustainable, to make it more palatable for a coach. And that's kind of a weird word, palatable, but to make it less abrasive on their overall life. So I think for me, like I said, being able to go back now, I get to coach my daughter, which is awesome. And I get to coach these young people, many of which have never, I'm probably the most intense high school coach in the country, maybe, but like I said, when you're a coach, you want to coach. Now, I don't know that I could ever hit that grind like you and I have gone into again, but
I've done enough Waffle Houses in my life. I'm not going back there.
Right. That's right. There's a lot of hotels.
A lot of hotels and Waffle Houses in my past, man, and never coming back. In terms of your health, you have got into jiu-jitsu, which is an incredible form of exercise, and it's done wonders for you. I can just tell, just even from photos and videos of just seeing you in the last couple of years, and the progress you've made, and you're just a different human now. So like, what has that process been like for you?
Well, I mean, I've always enjoyed working out. Like ever since I was a college swimmer, to me, my mindset was always the best workout. And this is kind of the old school coming out of me, and Greg Troy would love this, and Mark Bernardino. To me, your best workout was they were the ones that left you laid out on the deck where you could barely sit up at the end of a practice. I hated recovery practice because I didn't feel like I was getting anything out of it. And so that carried over into my adult life as I'm starting to try to find things to replace that what I was missing from swimming, from that competitive side of being an athlete, the competitive fire and wanting to beat an opponent. And I tried everything. I lifted. I love to lift. I enjoy it. My joints are getting pretty bad now, but I love to lift. I tried running, and I would run a lot. And I tried CrossFit, because CrossFit was, it's a different type of exercise. You can do this, challenge yourself. And then I got into jiu-jitsu. It's a very interesting story. So my third daughter, she's kind of always, all my daughters are very tall. They're all just at 6 feet or over. And so my third daughter is she's average height, and she's kind of always been kind of my smaller, she's kind of just a sweet, young lady. And so we're driving home from school one day, and I'm taking her home, and, she was telling me, she was like, Dad, a couple of girls were picking on my friend today. And I said, honey, sometimes middle school girls can be kind of mean. And she sat there for a second. She goes, sometimes it just makes me want to fight. And I was like, whoa. I said, I told my wife, I said, we got to do one of two things. We've either got to kind of teach her how to control this rage, or we got to teach her how to protect herself, one or the other. And so I talked to a buddy of mine. He said, you need to go over to Spartan Academy. They got a guy over there who's a world champion. They got some great kids classes. Go check it out. So I actually went by there, and I went to the gym to check on classes for my daughter. And I wanted something to give her some self-defense. And and kind of, encouragement, self-esteem, and all this kind of stuff. And so I go in and I'm talking to Gibson Sa, and we talk. He's like, absolutely, man. He said, we got what she needs. And Gibson is a 4th degree black belt and has had this gym in Columbia for about 10 years. He said, we've got what she needs. We got great kids classes. And he stopped for a minute. He said, you're pretty fit. You ought to come try it. And I was like, no, I'm good. I'll stick to my running a little bit. And he's like, no, I'll tell you what, you come out for a week. And if you don't like it, that's fine. He said, if you do, great. We'll talk about it then. And Brett, I went one time and I was like, this is it. This is what this is the first thing I've done since being an athlete in college, where I go through a training session and I'm so completely wrung out that you're wondering how you're going to walk out of the gym. And it is your first few years as a white belt, partially as a blue belt, you just get beat half to death by guys that know so much more than you. But then you start to evolve and you start to learn this chess game that is jiu-jitsu and how to string moves together. And the one thing that really kind of caught me was when I started to compete. And here's the thing, like when I race, this is what always made it different from swimming for me. When you race, it's about you and it's about your performance and what you can control inside your lane line. You can't control anything that anybody else does, right? You really can't capitalize off of a mistake that your opponent makes, right? If you're racing someone, okay, yeah, sure, maybe they take it out too fast and they suffer on the last 50 of a 200 and you get them. However, if you're in a jiu-jitsu match, you're looking for mistakes that your opponent is going to make so you can capitalize off of that. And that intrigued me. Like that was like, wow, that's something I've never gotten to do before. I'm waiting on him to mess up so I can just completely take his back and, lock in a choke and game over.
That feels good too, doesn't it? When they make a mistake,
yeah,
you're like, you messed up.
There's a little something like, especially now, I've been training now for years and I'm a purple belt, and you when you're rolling with somebody and they're relatively new and you feel them going a certain direction, and you can even tell them, hey, here's what I'm getting ready to do. Knowing full well there's nothing they can do about it to stop you. Wow. And so that, it's a great thing. But what it does for you is it's surrounded me with like-minded people. Like these guys I train with, even the ladies that I train with every day, they have this mindset of constant progression, constant learning, constant improvement, and the motivation that's inside those gym walls, the culture that's created. I learned a lot in my last few years of coaching, just inside the gym, seeing the culture that was created inside the gym and being able to transition that over to my team. I love it. My biggest regret is that I didn't start it earlier. And you sit back and I watch, you and I text back and forth all the time. Whenever there's a UFC, whenever the fights are on, we're always texting, but like you see that differently.
Yeah.
You see those fights differently. So it's something that I'm passionate about, that I love. And it's the best workout that I've ever been a part of. It's short of college athletics. But that's what drew me to it, was that's amazing, wrung out feeling at the end of a training session.
Well, listen, not only are you working out, but you're developing skills. And I imagine those skills make you feel pretty good too. Like any skill that you develop gives you confidence, right? So like I know there's been times where I've been very vulnerable in situations where I've felt to myself like, I wouldn't know how to protect myself here. I wouldn't know how to defend myself. I wouldn't necessarily know how to defend the people around me, even your kids or whatever it is. If something was to happen, man, I would freeze. Or, you must now be at a point where you can even size up situations where you're like, if this was to go down, this is what I would do. Right.
Yeah. And sometimes you find yourself doing that a little too much, but I mean, there's a confidence that comes with knowing how to handle yourself in any given situation. And the mats will teach you that really sometimes your biggest, most muscled up guys, some of the guys that look the scariest out in the real world, really are not as big a threat as you might think they are. Right. And so, it does give you a certain confidence into knowing how to protect yourself, knowing how to protect my family if something was to happen. And if there's ever a confrontation, what I need to do. Like, we train that stuff every day. One of our warm-ups at the gym, we have like these training pistols, and you'll put them inside of your belt of your gi. And then when it's time, when the whistle blows, it's a scramble, and you got one guy trying to grab the gun and the other guy is trying to keep the gun in place.
Oh, wow.
And so you go until, something happens, and you'd be amazed at how quickly you think you have control of a situation and how quickly it can go away. But that's a part of it. Like I do find myself, unfortunately, kind of creating my schedule around my training now. So it's fun. I do love it. And it's something that I wish I picked up earlier. My third daughter, the one who I initially went in there to find out about to begin with, she's trained. She does sessions. She doesn't get to do as much as she wants to, but she trains as well and loves it. So
that's really cool, man. I love that. I love the fact that, you corrected me. You are still in coaching, which is good. It's not at the level that we were at before, but you're doing it, which is awesome. Someone's getting your knowledge and experience, which is good. Doesn't matter what level it's on. I mean, I run clinics. I've been overseas doing clinics for 10 to 18-year-olds, and you get a 10-year-old in the pool, and you get just as much satisfaction out of teaching them how to streamline as you would somebody to, win an SEC championship or something. Sure. So, there's definitely, once you develop those skills, it's nice to pass them on. And so that feeling is good. So I'm glad you're doing that. Have you had moments where people have tried to pull you back into the big leagues?
Yeah, a few. And some of them were very intriguing. But, again, I sit back and I look. It's one of those situations where, I learned in my career, you never say never. Like, I'm never going to say that I'm not going to get back in coaching. I think there is a certain amount of time that passes that, I don't want to fall behind the learning curve with coaching. I think there's a certain amount of time where it's kind of the drop dead date, so to speak. Like, if I'm out of coaching for 10 years, guess what? I'm probably not getting back in that game. The coaching profession will have passed me by.
You watch the podcast, you see what's going on.
But I mean, I think you never say never, but yeah. I've had coaches that have asked, hey, I had one coach say, when you're ready to come back, call me first.
Right.
And I think I'm flattered by it. I am. But what I can tell you right now is I'm 100% happy and I'm content. And I know you are too. And the great thing, Brett, and I've told you this before, but I think it needs to be said more publicly. I think what you do right now for the swimming community and for the swimming world carries as much value as what you ever did as a coach and what you did as an athlete, because I think you raise awareness to a lot of issues. You bring questions up that I think have to be asked. And look, this podcast, I listen to every one of them. Like they're entertaining, and I think you ask great questions. You bring out the most in your guests and your athletes and the coaches that are on. But I commend you for this, because I did tell you one time. I told you, I said, man, it must feel great because you built this. You built it from nothing up into not only the biggest swimming podcast that there is, but this is one that is known, in a lot of circles, in a lot of coaching circles outside the sport. So I think that's something that you should be very proud of.
Yeah, listen, man, this is the best thing I've ever done professionally in my life. I've been to the Olympics as a swimmer. I've been as a coach. I've won Olympic golds as a coach. I've coached, been on national championship teams as a swimmer. I've been on national championship teams as a coach. So it's like they're all good things, and I wouldn't want to take any one of them away. But this is the biggest impact that I've had. This is the best thing that I've done for myself personally, is just is being able to connect with people like you and tell your story and deliver your message and give people an avenue. And not only that, do it in a way that people want to come back and listen more and again. Right. And then it's definitely, I do feel good that I'm delivering a good product. And honestly, it bothers me to an extent that you and I are not even sitting in the same room right now. I'm like, man, I would love to be in the same room and having this conversation. So like, I still want to get it to the point where it's better than this, you know, where it's just not a Zoom call, you know? So it's like, I feel like swimming deserves more than that. And so I really tried to get out on the deck. I just did a thing with Dave Salo, right?
That was awesome.
That was awesome. Yeah, it hit real good. And it was just one of those things where it was like, I figured it out. It's like, I can do that, right? I've allowed myself to do things like that now, and it is having a big impact. And I do feel very proud about that. And, you know, and I'm so thankful that people like you and the people that come onto this show do open up, right? Like they're honest and they give of themselves. And that's the only way this thing works, right? Like, it's one thing to be able to ask good questions, but it's another thing to give a good answer, you know? And if we're not being honest with ourselves and honest with the public about the good and the bad, then this thing doesn't work real well, you know? Yeah. So I'm very thankful for all the coaches and the swimmers that do, you know, and I sent them a text message. I sent you one like 2 hours ago and said, hey, can you do this? And you said, yes, I'll rearrange my calendar, you know? So like that's nice, man. It's a good thing. And I do want this to be a big impact in swimming. You know, I want your voice to carry, you know, weight in coaches. Hey, listen, you know, he had this experience. Don't let this happen to all of us. You know, like, we don't want to all leave the sport because of these reasons. We need to band together, things like that. So yeah, no, man, I appreciate you saying that.
Well, you know, like I said, I think I think a lot of it is just what you try to pass down now. It's interesting because I remember, and you remember this, when we were young coaches, finding that time, trying to get our foot in the door and have dinner with David Marsh and you know, Mark Bernardino and Greg Troy and all these guys. We'd go to convention and we'd try to, you know, I remember one time sitting around, Dave Salo was at this dinner and they were talking about what's more important, developing the kick first and carrying that over, or developing the catch first and developing the kick. You know, it's just a really interesting, and I'm taking notes on a napkin in a restaurant. Like, I'm writing 90 miles an hour, and how over time it evolves. And I found myself in the last few years of my career, younger coaches asking me to go to lunch and asking, you know, the same questions that I ask. And so I felt that kind of evolve. And so my message to them is, hey, this is the greatest profession ever. It is the greatest profession ever created. You get to impact people. You need to do it in a smart way, because I didn't always do that. Do it in a smart way where you can impact people for the longest possible time. And so it is all about that pace, and it is all about prioritizing your life and remembering to take time for yourself and things like that. And so, you know, I think, I honestly think younger coaches probably do a better job at this than you and I did.
Yeah, I would hope so, because I wouldn't want it to be a vicious cycle. You know, I think there was that mentality of, you know, just outwork everybody, you know, and I think we've moved away from that. Certainly on the swimmers side of things, it's not about just work. It's about recovery is important now. You know, like, that's a huge part of swimming and training is recovery. And it's talked about a lot with swimmers. Mental health with swimmers is talked about a lot. There's a lag in that in coaching, right? Like, it's starting to be talked about, but there's a lag, and there's more coaches now coming out and saying, hey, hang on a second. Like, I can't sustain this for 20 years. This is going to be a situation where I can come in and burn the candle at both ends for 5-10 years and I'm gone. And I don't want that. You know, again, you know, the guys that are doing it now, the Todd DeSorbos, the Greg Mehans, you know, young families, excellent coaches. You know, the Dave Durden, to an extent, you know, he's been in it for long enough now.
I look at Bobby Genturo at UNCW.
Yeah, Bobby Genturo. You know, it's like you know, I would hope that we just don't keep doing the same things. And Bobby is a great example of someone who chose a program where he can be himself, be successful, but then also have a lifestyle that complements him and his family, which is fantastic. Now, you're not going to get that necessarily if you take over from Eddie Reese at Texas. They're not going to allow you the Bobby Genturo lifestyle of, like, they're going to say, hey, we want you to win championships right now. Whoever
Yep.
takes over from Eddie, whenever Eddie decides to move away, it's going to be, well, you've got to continue this train, this winning train. And that's sad. It's sad in the sense that that's the only thing they're going to focus on.
But good for Bobby for realizing that, right? Look
Yeah.
at where he is and look at what he's doing with that program at UNCW.
Sure.
And he's able to, you see he's all the time on social media and Facebook. He's with his kids and his wife. And I think that's why I say I think some of these younger guys do it better than we did. And so, my hat's off to them. I could see those guys doing this for a really long time. And that makes me happy because I think they are doing a great job. I think there's some great creative swimming minds, but I think they also are going to have they're going to have an endurance that a lot of us struggle to maintain.
Yeah, for sure. What about in terms of just your recorded knowledge? When you were a head coach, did you record workouts? How did you record your history of what you've done in your coaching profession?
Are you talking about in terms of just tracking data and stuff like that? Are you talking about,
tracking workouts? Like, how did you write your workouts, and did you write them down, and do you have logbooks of them?
Yeah. Well, so the funny thing is this computer that I'm sitting on right now has about 18 years of Excel spreadsheets on it. And I started I used to go kind of the old school. I had my notebooks. Mm-hmm. And I'd write it out, I'd scratch, I'd put notes in. And then, when I got really technologically savvy, I went to Excel and I just liked it. Like that was comfortable for me. I was able to track, and I would set up these macro spreadsheets where, it would, I got it to the point where it really would track different data for me week over week, and just energy system training and stuff like that. It would break everything down. And so I have literally since 2003, I have just about every workout I've ever written in the past 20 years, and it's literally still on this computer that I have right now. I go back and I look at some of the stuff, and it's actually interesting. If you go back 20 years and look at the workouts you were writing 20 years ago and look at what you're writing now and where the focus is and things like that, you can learn a lot about your path as a coach and what you've learned and how you've evolved. Which I think is pretty interesting. But I never really got into the software and things like that. I will tell you, there was a time where Steve Youngbluth and I, when we were both at the Naval Academy together. So I coached 2000 to 2004 at the U.S. Naval Academy, and Steve Youngbluth was the women's assistant coach there at the same time. And first off, it was a great job. Steve and I were both officers in the Navy. That was part of our job. And we were coaching at the time. I was coaching with Lee Lawrence was the head coach. And Steve was the assistant to Dick Purdy. And every day we would go for these runs. We would go run every day. And there's two loops around the academy. There's an inner, and that's about a 3.1 mile loop. And then there's an outer, and it's a 5.5 mile loop. And depending on what type of day we were having, it was an inner or an outer. Like I would just meet with Steve and he'd be like, we got to go on an outer today. And we go on a 5.5 mile run. When you're at the academy, part of your work day is your workout. Like you have to do that. Really? But the things that came out of those runs, the things that came out of those conversations during a 5.5 hour or 5.5 mile outer, we talked about measuring power output. You've got right here on the screen, EO. This is something that Steve and I were talking about a long time ago. How do we measure applied force on the water? How do we be consistent with that? And we created this device that got 15 meter times down to the 100th of a second. Just all sorts of crazy stuff that we were trying. Kind of tracking devices where I remember when you were at Navy, you could get grants from the Naval Academy to do senior projects. And so we'd have these senior midshipmen come in, and we did this whole project one year where we had metallic strips we'd put on their goggles, and then we would set up transponders at each end of the pool, and we were using radio waves because they worked better in air and water. And we were tracking speeds the entire length of practice. Wow. And, it was incredible here. Here me and Steve, we're 25, 26 years old, and we're going through just asking questions and trying to figure out answers. And I look back on that time and I think, man, that was
cool.
some good stuff there. Like we got to do a lot of research, and you know as well as I do, that changes when you become a head coach.
Yeah.
You don't have a lot of time to ask those questions and actively figure out the answers because of everything else that's involved in being the head coach.
Yeah. Listen, my most creative years were my assistant coaching years. Like if I go back, I talk about this a lot on the podcast of like, well, back in 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010 kind of era, like I was the most creative, and we were having incredible success from being creative. Now, it's not to say that we didn't have success beyond that, but I was far less creative, so yeah, very, very interesting. And well, what I would say to you in terms of the technology, you got it to the point where you were an Excel kind of guy. What you could probably do now is you take it to the next phase of AI. You take your Excel spreadsheets, you put them into AI, and you could probably pump out a book of information based on all of your workouts. It could probably just give you a book that you could then take and keep and flick through and say, yeah, look how cool this is. I've got 15, 20 years of workouts just, put into this incredible piece of history that I could just put on my shelf and hand off to anybody who ever wanted it. You could probably do an ebook and things like that. So yeah, there's things with AI these days that you can take all that information and make it sexy and pretty and get it out to people, because I was just having conversation with Abanchek yesterday, actually, and I know that he's got logbooks from 1958 sitting on his shelf, and it's like, man, the information that is in there sitting on his shelf, like incredible. Like to think that he's got logbooks for the past 60, 70 years sitting on his shelf, and no one has access to that information. Imagine if we could somehow put it into AI and get people access to Abanchek's history of his knowledge and the learnings that would come from that. You know what I mean?
You say that. I remember working when I was at Navy. Lee Lawrence was the head coach. Lee Lawrence was an assistant coach to Red Sylvia up at Springfield College. And Red Sylvia was so far ahead of his time in terms of his technique and knowledge of technique, just his ability with biomechanics and movement and things like that. Red Sylvia was teaching high elbow catch before it became a thing. When Ian Thorpe made it just a mind blowing new stroke that everybody was doing. Red Sylvia was teaching this years ago, and you're right. Like you look at that, and I say the same thing about Lee Lawrence. Lee had years and years of notebooks, and it was almost just as good to go read his notes about his own workouts that he wrote up. There were some of them that he would write a note. He'd put a note at the top. One of the best workouts we've done. The team received it well, blah, blah, blah. You turn the next page, and the top of the note at the top of the page would say, "I'm an idiot. Can't believe I even wrote this down." You know what I mean? Just reading their thoughts as they go through it was not only entertaining, but it was also it made me a better coach.
That just gave me another idea. I do have some association with ASCA, and maybe I'll get to them and say, hey, you guys should use AI technology. Go around to all the top coaches and say, hey, put your stuff into this system and somehow grant people access to this knowledge, this historical knowledge. Instead of it just sitting on computers like yours or bookshelves, like John's. Somehow use technology to get it, label it, and someone could just click on your name and say, I want to read McGee's, past 20 years of notes, and you could just go in there and access it. I mean, how cool would that be for swimming and for the future of swimming if we could just click on names and access all this knowledge? That'd be cool. So maybe that's an idea. Just thought of something. So there we go. All right, man. Listen, this has been cool. Great to catch up. I'm sure there's a UFC fight coming up this weekend in France. So we'll text back and forth with it. And I still tell you, I think you and I got to connect. We got to do a podcast, like a live stream of we maybe the McGregor Chandler UFC in December. Maybe we set up a live stream on that and go down that road. When's Adesanya? Is Adesanya next week in Sydney?
I believe so. It's either, yeah, I believe you're right. I believe you're right.
Next week. That could be, we could maybe line up
That's
for that. Yeah, let's see what happens there. But yeah, definitely maybe McGregor as well. He's fighting in Vegas, I think. So that'd be pretty cool.
Or maybe we just grab tickets, go to Vegas. So
Definitely do that. Yeah, it's close for me, man, down the road. So I'm definitely up for that anytime you want. So yeah, if anyone's listening, if there's a group of us that maybe want to get together for a fight in Vegas, yeah, let's do that. That'd be cool.
Yep, that'd be a blast.
All right, man, this has been fun. Appreciate you doing this. Thanks, man.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on, man.
All right, take care, brother.